Training is not DoorDash, right? The training comes when I show up, but then there's got to be reinforcement by me as the trainer for several weeks after, as well as reinforcement by the leadership. And it's that lack of reinforcement that is where it all falls down.
Richard Harris. Richard is the founder of the Harris Consulting Group, a sales trainer, a sales coach, also a podcast host, and he helps organizations and teams get better at sales.
You just want to have a process that helps you stay focused on the end result, which is hopefully a sale, while also respecting your time and your prospect's time, because it's not about you. So you need to build that process with the buyer's experience in mind. Talk less, 25% less. Be precise and be concise, because it's not about us, it's about them. Nobody cares what we do. They only care about the pains we solve in relation to the pains they're experiencing.
Richard Harris, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I appreciate it.
What is the best piece of coaching advice that you've ever received in your career?
Oh gosh. Best coaching advice I ever received was talk less, 25% less. I had a boss and she's like, Richard, you're a really great communicator. You're over communicating. So 25% less. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? She's like, try to get your thoughts across with 25% fewer words, write shorter emails. She says, you're very detail oriented, which people like. Learn how to cut it back. And I was like, I still remember that every day because I'm a chatterbox.
How's that impacted the advice that you tend to give out now to sales teams? And I suppose the way you communicate that, is there a specific piece of advice that you find yourself giving to teams over and over again?
Yeah, I think the one thing is, it's sort of be precise and be concise. You know what I mean? Like just figuring out a way to do it that doesn't make us over talk. From a sales perspective, right? Because it's not about us, it's about them. And that's where this really comes from, is I tell people all the time, nobody cares what we do. They only care about the pains we solve in relation to the pains they're experiencing. So that's the thing that I teach the most, I think, in terms of this.
Yeah, that's literally I've got that quote written down on my notes before this episode. And remember, nobody cares what you do. They only care what pains you solve. And that's something that's come up over and over again as I've talked to kind of people in your kind of field as well over the last few weeks. And interestingly, I'd love you to get into, keeping it concise when it comes to developing a relationship with a potential buyer or someone that you're having the calls with, because finding that repertoire and finding those, I guess, common interests and things is also really important. How do you find the balance between building that relationship and that rapport, but also making sure you're pulling back to give them the chance to shine?
Yeah, I think that's a really good, right? How do you create space for them? I do it at the very beginning of a conversation. I'm very precise about how I open first conversations, that, this is how much time we have. Let me know if you have any hard stops. And 5 minutes before, it's supposed to end, I'm going to call timeout and see where we're at. And I tell people, Sandy, look, if I can't help you, just say so. You're not going to offend me. And Sandy, if I think that I can't help you once I learn more about what you're up to, I'll tell you, and I'll even tell you who to talk to. And from there, I think that starts to really lower the barriers that people bring coming into a sales conversation, right? And I say this all the time, is that it's not about getting people to fall in love with us. It's about getting them to fall in trust with us. And I think it sends a very big trust message when you tell someone early that, hey, if it's not a good fit, just say so. And then doing it reverse of like, if I can't help you, I'll tell you, and I'll tell you who to talk to. People appreciate that. People appreciate that, wow, you're probably not like the average salesperson I think about. And that barrier to trust starts to lower itself quite a bit. So I think it starts at the very beginning. And then it does come down to just asking them questions and asking them to explain their situation, or re-explain their situation with greater detail. And that continues to build the trust.
What about What about when ego kind of comes into it? And, sales is often it can be a dirty word, and people kind of, you get the image of the Jordan Belfort and the sleazy salesman, and often the ego kind of comes into it. And have you found when you've been coaching teams and others that ego gets in the way of being able to say, look, if I'm not right for you, please tell me?
Getting them to say that out loud, that their ego.
Yeah. Or the reps being able to admit to themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there is a little bit of that. But it's more the fact that because they've never been taught it and they've never done it. Anytime we're asked to do something different is scary, right? Like you and I, like we were talking before we started about surfing, right? And I said, I'm sort of this forever beginner. Like my ultimate goal in surfing is to learn how to drop into the wave, right? Like I'm sort of at that stage between where you learn how to ride in the white water and then actually learning to catch a wave. And I've yet to like catch a 4 or 5 foot wave and drop down in it. But I know once I do it a bunch of times or try it and fail, then it's going to work. The cool thing about this statement though is you don't fail. Like nobody kicks you out of a meeting for saying those things, right? And part of it is that it goes against the grain of, what I think a lot of us were taught. And I taught for a long time, which was, don't ever give them an out, right? Like don't let them have an exit. Like, yeah, give them an exit because nothing will exhaust me or any salesperson more than chasing maybes. So please tell me. Like the best answer in sales is no, it's not yes. Tell me no fast because I'll go find someone else who wants to talk to me. I don't need to waste my time. And then I want to say something. You brought up this thing that, sales is a dirty word. And it's really funny because who lies the most in professions? Who are they? You know who they are. Who do you think they are? Or who do you think people think lie the most? Any profession, right? Politicians, right?
Yeah.
Lawyers. And then people often say salespeople.
Yeah. If I'm honest, first thing that came to my head was salespeople. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to know who lies more than salespeople?
Tell me.
Prospects. They never tell you your budget. They're always trying to play a game with you. They're always trying to move the shell, the piece under the shell. They lie way more than we do. Way more. It's crazy how much the prospects and customers lie. And once you kind of realize it, you become less defensive about it. You're kind of like, okay, now I get it. Now I understand the game a little more. So yeah, I'm going to have to get them to trust me in order for them to start telling me the truth, right? I'm not trying to call them out on their lies. I'm just trying to have a conversation. But once you realize that they're kind of the dirty person, not us, it changes the mindset, in my opinion.
What can sales teams do to kind of change that narrative in their own brains and start to kind of sniff that out? Is that something you've just learned over doing the 10,000 hours, putting in the reps in your own career?
Oh yeah. I think so. I didn't even like come up with the concept of it until like 2 months ago. I was like, what? It's not me, it's them. Right? It's not me, it's you. And I just sort of put my arms around it and was like, yeah, that's what's happening. But it goes back to, we have to build trust. Well, why do we have to build trust? Because they think we're lying, but we know that they're not telling us the whole truth either. Like, yes, if you stop and think about it, it's kind of simple. It's just never been said out loud very much, in my opinion.
So with that in mind, how do you then go into an organization and start to kind of restructure their sales team and go, look, guys, you need to think about it like this a little bit more? Where does that work begin? Does it start with the leaderships and go top down, or does it start with the actual reps?
Well, I don't necessarily teach that concept or talk about that concept till I'm actually in the training with the team.
Understood.
Right? We talk about trust a lot. We talk about, when I'm talking to leadership, I'm talking to them about, well, what are their challenges? And when they say, well, we need prospecting training, I'm like, okay, but what do you mean? Like email training, cold call training, LinkedIn training? Like what kind of prospecting training? And if they say emails, like, okay, great. Do you mean subject lines or body length? Like, what do you mean? Like, because everybody gives you these generic terms, no matter what you're selling. And we need, like I said earlier, we need to frame it in their frame of reference for what they're experiencing. And so that's the first part. When I use phrases like the customer lies more than we do, stuff like that, that's more in the training to create the humor to get them to open their mind to what I'm about to teach them, right? Like, it's not like walk out there and tell people that. Like, that's not the goal, right? It's the goal of like, we have been taught or created belief systems in our head through experience and life, not just in sales, but just any way. And it's kind of like, how do we break through those things? A little bit maybe like the ego that you were asking about is like, how do I break that down? And I try to sort of use a little bit of cold water on the face approach of like, keep this in mind, right? By the way, I can say certain things that you can't say. So as I throw out snarkiness, I'm like, yes, I can say that because it's my own business. Sandy, you've got to respect your business and the way they want you to talk about themselves, right? So I try to use that approach to then have those things open their mind for what I'm about to teach them.
Such an interesting point there, because then that brings up the idea of how, and I kind of mentioned earlier, how much of your personality do you inject into your calls, and how much do you kind of let that bleed into what you're trying to sell versus kind of just going off the standard script that you're given as an SDR or, given out.
So you're talking about authenticity, and I talk about this all the time, right? How Richard says something is different than how Sandy's going to say it, and different than how Rebecca's going to say it. So whenever I teach something, I'm teaching the concept for 2 minutes, right? Like, here's the concept and here's why it should work. Here's how I say it. Now let's role play it in the sales team, right? Like, how do you say it? Because Sandy, I want you to find your voice, and Rebecca, I want you to find your voice. So we're very conscious of making sure that authenticity comes through. And you said a really great word. It's another one of those quote unquote dirty words of the word script, right? There's a difference between having and using a script and sounding scripted. I don't want anybody to sound scripted. We sound scripted when we don't have the words memorized, when we don't have what we know we're going to say, already there. That's when scripting is bad. And it happens in the beginning, kind of like what we were saying earlier. If I'm teaching you something new and you've never said it that way, well, yes, it creates a little anxiety. It's a little fearful, and you still don't even know how you're going to sound saying it. So scripts are not bad. And every salesperson I know uses scripts. They hate the word, but they use them all the time. I say this all the time, like, so you're going to take me to your demo, and your demo is completely different every single time. Well, no, but I follow this guideline. I'm like, stop using the word guideline over the word script. It's a script. Call it a script. That's what it is. Stop pretending, right? So people use them all the time, and they use mini scripts along the way, right? When they are talking about one particular feature or one particular objection, there's something they've memorized. That's just a script. Like, stop pretending it's not a script. It is.
Yeah, because I was going to say, is it better to kind of refer to it as notes? And I mean, I've never been a sales rep or anything, but even through the context of me doing this podcast and things, like on the side of my screen, I've got notes written out. So
sure.
I don't because podcasting isn't scripted at all, but I write fairly significant notes, and I kind of refer to them, and they do tend to kind of guide me. Now, obviously, they're different every time because the guest is different every time, but I'd be fairly lost without them. So it's quite interesting that, I don't know, I maybe thought that you were going to say a bit broader, but I guess essentially I do, don't I?
You have a script you follow, right? But that also doesn't mean you can't make it authentic. Sure. That's the difference, is like bringing in that authenticity, right? And that's what matters. And it's different in a podcast world than a sales world, because we really are talking to generally the same people, saying the same thing over and over again, and that sort of thing. So,
yeah. Such an interesting way of thinking about it, because with carrying on with the authenticity thing, I had a woman on called Hannah, and she was very pro, like, spend that kind of 5-10 minutes even before you're doing the demo or even towards the end, and get to know them a bit and find out, where they like to eat and what they do on the weekends and, things like that. If there's time set aside, is that something that you kind of recommend and believe in as well? Or as you said at the beginning, it's all about being concise. So it's interesting to get everyone's point of view on this.
What was Hannah? Can you tell me Hannah's last name? I wonder if I know her.
Her name's Hannah Ajikawa.
I know Hannah. Yes.
No way.
She's
Oh, cool.
yeah. We've done. I think she's been on my podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. I
and
love
I've spent
Hannah's
time
awesome.
with her. Yeah, she's really, really great. So,
Yeah. Oh, wait, that's cool.
I think what you're asking is about how people like to operate. I'm not a small talker. Like I
Okay.
don't really like small talk. So for me and the way I do things, I kind of jump into that conversation. Now, if they ask me at the beginning of a conversation something, I'll do it. Right. I'll gladly jump in and and I'm very good at asking them back. Like I've learned in life that like, if someone asks you about something, you answer it. And then, the rule of reciprocity is I should ask them something back to foster that connection. And, um, and yes, it can be genuine. I'm just not natural at it. My
Okay.
wife is the complete opposite. Right. So if it works for you, then make it work for you. And yes, there are plenty of people I've gotten to know and who've become friends and all those things through small talk. In the world that I live and swim in, particularly in sales, I'm often dealing with VPs of sales or CROs who are often sort of short-minded because we tend to think kind of quick, right? And we want to go a little faster. So I don't think it hurts me there. But yeah, if it works for you, do it. Like that's the one thing I'm saying. Like I've said a lot of things today. Look, if you're being successful in sales, don't go change something because Richard Harris said so. Right? Like you're on the right track. Right? Like I might be something you could toy around with or play with or something, but just because someone like me or Hannah comes on doesn't mean you go in and you change every little thing. Right? Particularly in sales, we're all trying to get a little bit better at a time. So I don't want to ruin someone else's authenticity. So if small talk works for you, then go to it. Like I wouldn't stop you.
You mentioned they're working with, VPs of sales, CROs, things like that. Let's talk about leadership for a bit, because I think that's also a huge part of this industry as well. How can leaders avoid those kind of initial pitfalls of spending, say it's like founder-led sales or, early stage, and they're finding themselves having to just put out fires all the time and not necessarily finding that time to empower a team or build the system to help them not have to put out those fires. Is that something that you've kind of come across working with?
Yeah, I think that happens at every founder-led sales approach. Most of the founders that I work with and partner with, they're tech-minded, right?
Yeah.
They're coders, which means that they're always putting out a fire. They gravitate towards that because they're writing code, they're figuring out a problem, they're solving the problem, and they're moving on to the next thing. Well, that's not necessarily how humans work, right? Humans are humans, right? And just because you can change the code with one line and it starts to work does not mean that you can change the human with one line and it starts to work. Those are two different things. And what you're describing is normal growth, right? It's a normal growth pain for founder-led sales that at some point they need to learn how to let go of the business motion and trust someone to come in and know how to do it. And so that's not an easy thing for people to do because, you're giving up you're giving up control to someone else. Meanwhile, you built this beautiful baby, or at least you think it's a beautiful baby, and you don't want them to mess it up. And that is where, going back to what you said for founder-led sales, their ego can hurt them because they love to say that they want someone else to do the selling, but then they don't understand why it has to be different than the way they were selling. Founders often forget that their earliest customers purchase from them, because they have the title founder, because they're the one that if something goes wrong, they know exactly who to call. And as soon as you put any person between that founder and the customer has to be a little more skeptical because they got to know where the truth lies. When you're talking to the founder, you're going straight to the horse. So I think that's the challenge that I see, and leaders have to learn how to let go, let that salesperson, sales leader come in and do their job and not micromanage them, and not think that just because you're the really smart tech person that you're also the really smart salesperson, because you're not. I know you're not. right? No more than I'm the super smart tech person, right? It goes both ways.
Yeah. It's been a fun lesson for me with Pit Stop interacting with. It's my first foray really into kind of tech and all this stuff, and especially as we pivoted into AI, which is a new industry for everyone. But
Right.
it's been fun for all of us to realize like what you're a master at and what you're not, because none of us are masters of. We're all masters of none, right? You know, you can't. You don't. Well, sorry, you don't want to be a master of none. You know, we're all good at our specific things, and to assume that is the beginning of the end, in my opinion, when it comes to any sort of organization and trying to get people to scatter across, and dipping their toe into every kind of industry. Talk to me about systems then. You know, it's a word that's repeatedly come up again on the podcast, but also just I see on LinkedIn and everything like that. You know, it's all about implementing a solid system, implementing a system, adding a system in. Kind of sometimes for me that sounds a bit like jargon. But what does that actually look like, kind of boots on the ground, whether it's in your career or now as you advise and consult for organizations doing that?
Yeah, I think we all understand the idea of a repetitive pattern can be helpful. And again, I'll go back to surfing. There are certain things you have to do in a certain order to stand up on that wave, right? You've got to, be centered on the board. You've got to start paddling at the right moment. You got to pop up right at the right time. That's a system. It's the same thing in sales, right? It's a sales process, and it's never the same wave twice. Something might have to adjust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same
Every
thing.
time.
You just want to have a process that helps you stay focused on the end result, which is hopefully a sale, while also respecting your time and your prospect's time. Because it's not about you. So you need to build that process with the buyer's experience in mind. What's the experience you want them to have going through the journey that the seller creates? And so you have to define your process. And if you don't, you will default to their process all the time. If I don't have a process that I follow, I will default to theirs. And what that means is things will happen out of order. Things like you get on the phone and the first thing they want to ask you is about pricing. Well, that's out of order, right? I understand they want it. I understand we should discuss it, but they don't get it right when they ask for it. Because if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. And there's a way to handle that. But as soon as things start to happen out of order, that's where the challenge is, right? And that's why you need to have a process in place.
So do you almost when thinking about making this system, is it a good idea to almost reverse engineer it and think about, taking it from the buyer or your ICP or whatever it is and building it backwards based on what they said? So rather than trying to build it yourself.
I'm a little bit, I get torn. This is a new one. And I can't tell if I'm just tired of the reverse engineering phrase. Like it's just stale, right? So I want to think more like forward engineering. Like, okay, if I'm the customer, what's the best experience like for me? And granted, I'm not selling to me. And that's another mistake we all make, is that we all think we're selling to someone like us. So for me, this is everybody's sales process as far as I'm concerned. Suspect, prospect, qualifying, discovery, selection, negotiation, closing. Like those are the titles of every stage in your sales process. Demo is not a stage name. Proposal sent is not a stage name. Those are activities within a stage. So for me, I avoid that phrase of reverse engineering, but someone could say, Richard, you're just reverse engineering. And I'd be like, okay, fine, I am. But ultimately, though, it doesn't matter if you do forward engineering or reverse engineering, as long as you're creating an experience that's healthy for the customer, that helps them feel seen, heard, and understood. That's what matters, right? As humans, we all want to be seen, heard, and understood. And so creating a system that does that is where I think you're going to win the most.
Within your, we'll get onto the surfing retreats and stuff you do, because I do want to talk about surfing before we finish.
Yeah.
But you've on that, when I was doing my research, you have this concept of being professional.
Yes.
Yes. And it sounds like you kind of alluded to that there. Can you kind of go into that ethos a little bit more and kind of where that came from?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest pieces of bad advice I was given and I taught for a long time was, when you come to work, leave everything else at the door, right? You don't have to worry about life. And that's not how life works, right? Like that's just not how it is. I've got kids, I've got a wife, I've got a mortgage I've got to pay, I've got, things on my mind that affect my life. And so I believe that there's the personal you and the professional you, and they're the same thing. They're not separate. You can't say, work Richard versus personal Richard, because my personality comes in. And when I'm outside of work, my work personality comes in. So you take your whole self with you, no matter where you go. And so that's where I came up with this word of professional versus professional, because I think you have to acknowledge both pieces of who you are. And I think that that's just important for humanity. Because if you don't recognize that in yourself, then you're constantly lying to yourself throughout the day. And that just doesn't feel good.
Well, then it means that you can't show up authentically for work when you are on your sales calls and things like that. But also vice versa, when you get home after you've done your sales calls, you also then can't show up for your family or your kids, like you just mentioned.
Yeah, exactly it. That's why we do it.
Yeah. When I had an author, a guy called Richard Blundell, based here in the UK. He wrote a book that our founder Emmett loved, and I had him on, and he was talking about. You've mentioned the word human quite a few times, I've noticed, which I love.
Yeah.
And he was talking about when you are talking to prospects and having these discovery calls, and he was like, stop talking about your products. He was like, no one gives a shit what color it is or what it looks like. He said, don't find the stone in their shoe, find the nail in their boot and tell them how you're going to help them remove it. Find that human problem, very human problem they're dealing with. He said the ultimate salespeople are dentists or doctors, because they're, you're never going to argue with them about what they're trying to sell you, and you're going to pay for it, and you're going to go, oh, I'm so annoyed. But then you're going to be sat at home later on, and that root canal you had done, or, the broken arm that's now in a cast and you're taking medication, you're sat there going, well, they solved my problem, so of course I'm going to buy it. And I wonder if you can maybe speak to those analogies as well, because it sounds like you're very on board with that. And like I said, I love it. Yeah, you keep saying the word human, and it's kind of going in my head, and it's very antithetical to, I guess, an outsider's view of what sales can look like.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, as I like to say, the truth will set you free. It just might sting a little bit. Right. So I think it's about the humanity. It's about just trying to have a human to human connection and conversation with someone, that lets them know that you're there. Right. Brene Brown talks about this. It's the word empathy. Right. And if you've never seen Brene Brown's little video on empathy, it's really good. It's like 2 minutes. And she talks about empathy creates connection, right? Where we can empathize with someone. Sympathy actually drives disconnection in her mindset, in the sense that, oh, I'm really sorry that happened. And then there's nothing left to fill the void after that. Right. And she talks about how do we use empathy to draw more connections as humans. And I think we hear the word empathy in sales all the time, but people don't understand what that truly means as much as I think they think it means. Right. And it really means sitting there in that moment with them. So in sales, if someone, we're taught to handle objections, right? And as my wife likes to remind me, she doesn't want to be handled. So you actually have to marinate in those objections, right? It's like, oh, we're looking at the competition. Well, normally we're taught to, oh, they bring up this competitor. Here's what we say. When that's not what we should be doing yet. We should be saying, okay, well, what do you like about that feature? That's great. Yeah. By the way, how important is that feature to you even making this decision? Because sometimes it's not. It's just something they brought up. In sales, we hear it's this feature we don't have, and all of a sudden we run to our product team and say, if we do this, we can make we can get the sale. When in fact, we don't really know if that's true. So you have to spend time marinating in these objections. You have to spend time with that slightly uncomfortable conversation when they say the price is too high, right? You can't just go straight to a discount, right? This is the humanity part. This is the part where we're trying to find the nail. Well, help me understand, the pricing. When we spoke, you said, the challenge you're facing is affecting you by this dollar amount or this time. You know, where's the disconnect between the pain you suggested you have versus, the commercial terms we're talking about? So you have to spend time there. And that's the human part. That's the human to human element, in my opinion.
Is that something that you found as a bit of a through line that affects businesses of all sizes? So I know you've worked with, Google, Zoom, Visa, the huge businesses versus working with something like we said earlier, still founder led, a very small startup. Is it the kind of same through line across every business depending on size?
Yeah, it is the same through line. Like humanity is humanity, right? You have to adjust to who you're talking to, right? You're talking to a CIO or a CTO. They're going to be very skeptical of us as salespeople, right? But what are they going to do? They're going to lie the most, right? So we have to figure out ways to chip away at that. And it doesn't matter if you're selling to Fortune companies or you work for a Fortune company or you're a startup or you're selling to startups. That human to human connection is still the part that matters the most, as much as anything else.
You mentioned their disconnection. And again, I'm maybe we can talk about surfing now, but you, again, in these surfing and sales retreats that you do, one of the other lines that really stuck out to me is disconnection in order to increase connection. And that's something I love. Like as a surfer myself, and I'm very lucky. The culture at Pit Stop, Richie, our CEO, he's like, if you need to go surfing at 11 a.m. every morning or when it's low tide, so that you can bring your best self to work the rest of the time, I'm cool with that. Like, go and do it. So I'd love you to get that idea of disconnection to increase connection. Where did that come from, and why is that so important? And then tell me about the kind of retreats and where that came from as well.
Well, I think the disconnection to drive connection is something we've all known for a long time. We've seen it, in all of our lives. For those of us who are old enough before AI, right? You could spend hours in a spreadsheet, and at some point you just have to walk away. Like you just can't look, you just can't stare at the computer screen anymore, right? Same thing in sales. It's like, hey, if I'm banging out really quality, highly personalized emails for prospecting, after about an hour and a half, my brain's got to rest, right? Your brain can't run for 8 hours a day nonstop and focused on this one business activity. It's very unhealthy, right? I think there are certain places where you might, like as a coder, that might work to go for longer stretches of time because there's an immediate result of what you're doing, right? There's all these little wins along the way, but generally speaking, you've got to disconnect. And I've said it all the time, like, okay, I need to get out of here. I now have a walking treadmill for under my desk. So and I'm not walking fast, but I can make sure that I walk at least a mile or two every day if the weather's bad or whatever, right? And it allows me to move my body physically, which is good for my brain, so that while I am doing stuff, I can concentrate. So I think you have to disconnect in order to connect. And I think that's part of what we did at Surf and Sales was, the story, the genesis was that Scott and I were in Costa Rica with our families. We're walking off the beach and he looks at me and he says, how come nobody comes here for a sales conference? Like, why do we got to go to the Marriott, right? In Omaha, Nebraska or something like that. And then no offense to anybody from Omaha. And I said, I don't know. Well, why don't we do it? And, thing I know about Scott is if I throw down the gauntlet, he'll make it happen. So that was the genesis of it. And when we did it, we specifically built it around the fact that this is not a all day sit in a conference room sales conference at all. Right. We spend about 4 hours a day on sales related content, leadership or I've done stuff on depression and stuff like that. And then the other times, there's at least 2 hours a day of surf lessons. Then people are surfing and then people are hanging out, getting to know each other with that connection. And we tell people you can't schedule your work calls. Like you're not there to like work from Costa Rica. Right. There's the occasional person who does take a call, and we actually have a hammock called the closing hammock because it seems like every time someone takes a call from that hammock, they close the deal. But you're not there for that. You're there to have these relationships and build these relationships and have this experience that's different than any other experience you've ever had. And we've been doing it for 9 years now. I think we've done about 15 of them, and we still have every group still has an active WhatsApp channel going, because you find deals in business, you find a new job, you find a new employee, you're looking for a new job, you let these people know, because it's it's a nice stew of people, right? There's SDRs, there's AEs, there's founders, there's VPs, we've even had customer success and head of tech come to a couple of them, which has been really great, because then we can have different conversations. So we're there to foster these connections, right? Not just it's not a bro fest, and it's not a drinking drunk fest at all. It's a let's learn something and have a good time and get to know some people.
It kind of going back off my own experience as well with interacting with our CEO Richie, and what he says to me of, if I get that hour hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, but don't tell Richie.
Right.
Like of being in the ocean and being in that, it sounds corny, but it's true. Like being in that flow state, and I don't look at my phone, and I genuinely, like, you'll know as well, I can't sit and think about what's the next piece of marketing content I'm creating, or what's the next ad campaign look like when I'm paddling into a 3 to 4 foot. It's I have to be exactly where I am. So and then prior to me being out there, I can give whatever is in front of me my best self at work, and then afterwards as well, I can do that. And I think it's almost like there's residual flow state that goes in and out when I'm at work afterwards.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was like, how often, you're right, as you're dropping into a wave or riding a wave, you're not thinking about work. How often, though, when you're sitting out there waiting for a wave, or you've just ridden a wave and you're paddling out, and then all of a sudden an idea comes to you, right? Because you've freed your mind up to stop thinking about all this stuff. And then that's so often when our best ideas come to us, right? There's a theory of, like, why do great ideas come to us when we're in the shower? Or
I was about to say shower thoughts.
Right. Or if you're on a long drive, right? It's because you're not thinking about something that then creates the space in your mind for some creativity to draw in. So there's the reason for that disconnect in order to reconnect.
Yeah, I mean, you should see my notes app on my phone. Like if I have a usually, because I come in from the surf, and then I'm very lucky. I live right by the beach, so I walk down to the water in my wetsuit with my board, and then I come back and I take a shower, and then usually I have to run and grab my phone, and I've written some sort of idea down, or this or that, and then a couple of hours later, I'm no longer in that flow state, and I have to try and deconstruct and figure out what all this nonsense that I've written down, what this scribble, and then turn it into a script, like you were saying earlier, turn it into something actually usable that I can move forward with. It's so interesting. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, is that flow state idea.
I think so too. I think we forget about it, and that's when we stress out. And it's kind of like that moment where you're at your highest level of stress, trying to remember, like, this is not a good place. I need to stop what I'm doing and I need to change my frame of reference. And I talk about this a lot too, of, like, there are certain things I do. Like, I do a thing called a 3-minute walk, or I'm sorry, a 6-minute walk. I'll walk out my door and I'll walk 3 minutes in one direction and 3 minutes back. And just moving my body for 6 minutes works. Right? I don't know. You can call it 4 minutes and do it 2 minutes each way. I don't, but just something that, like, gets me moving and gets my blood pumping is healthy. We know this, but it doesn't mean I have to always go to the gym for an hour, right? It means I can just walk. If I can take a conversation that doesn't have to be on Zoom and do it on a phone call, I'll take my dogs for a walk while I do it. Sometimes that doesn't work for me because I need to take notes because I'm talking to a prospect or client. But other times it's when people are calling and asking me for advice. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And I'll just go take a walk while I do it because I know it's good and I know my dogs need to get out. So it gets me out of the office. It gets me away from this monitor, right? That's it's doom staring versus doom scrolling.
How much do you think AI tools and, the influence of AI on everything we do now, do you think that's kind of interrupting our flow state a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's forcing us to think differently, and that's good. It's forcing us to think in a more open mind approach of how we're going to do this, how we're going to handle this, how can I make this better? And I think that forces you to stop doing what you've been doing so repetitively and recognize, to your point, like, is there a better flow state, right? Is there a better way to do this flow? And at least examine the situation versus always trying to control it. So I think it's healthy, right? It's coming, whether people like it or not. You got to get over that argument. Like like it's time to stop, right? You're either going to figure out a way to embrace it or you're going to get replaced. That's the way it's going to be. So you better learn how to embrace it, because those who embrace it are going to be the ones who are displaced last.
Yeah. In all honesty, for me, using it more and more, and for me, I'm using it. So I'm marketing. So I'm using it for creative endeavors and for it to kind of support me on that side of things, which it still has a long way to go. But actually, for me, it's helped me develop the systems and put that all together a lot more so that I can actually spend more time on the fun creative bits,
Me too, right? It's like it helps me, I've used it to help me write stuff, help me write blog posts or content and stuff like that. And I already know that it comes back 70% correct, 60% correct. But then when I'm editing it, I'm now using my creative brain versus me trying to write and self-edit at the same time, which is exhausting, right? So that's how I see it being supportive to what I'm doing. It gives me ideas that I can then think about and decide if that's going to be the best way. So I'm spending my time being more strategic in my mindset than I am trying to execute all the time. I'm now thinking about the strategy of execution as well as the execution.
One kind of last question that we tend to ask everyone, and it's lovely that you've brought up execution. Where is it in organizations and teams that you see consistent breakdowns when it comes to execution or performance?
Well, for what I do, right, and where I see it, it's a lack of process, right? If they don't have a process, everybody's doing it their own way. And B, it's a lack of training and coaching, right? Like you can't, I just did a post the other day. Training is not DoorDash. Richard doesn't just show up and, all of a sudden, you're full, right? The training comes when I show up, but then there's got to be reinforcement by me as the trainer for several weeks after, as well as reinforcement by the leadership. And it's that lack of reinforcement that is where it all falls down. So I think those are the things, where you need to try and have a process and a system that can operate, recognizing that it's fluid, but it does create a controlled flow. And then making sure that you are training and coaching on a regular basis.
Love that. Richard, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom, insights. It's so great to get a lot of crossover with other guests that have done, but also it's so cool to get the kind of different points of view. I'm slowly realizing that, I was a bit worried when we were pivoted into the sales thing. I was like, is every conversation going to be the same? And I'm very much learning that whilst the topics are the same, there's actually so many. In the UK, I don't know whether this analogy hasn't crossed the pond, but there's many different ways to skin a cat, as we say in the UK.
Oh yeah, we have that.
There's so many different ways to go about, all the different processes, and it's so cool to get insights from, experts like yourself and Hannah, and it's great. Where can people go if they want to find out more about what you do?
So I'm a little crazy, so write this down: +1 415 596 9149. That's my real cell phone number, because the only time I ever hear from my teenage boys are when they ask for money. So yeah, you can always text me. You can WhatsApp me if you want. Tell me you heard me on the podcast so I know. But you can also find me at the Harris Consulting Group or just Richard Harris on LinkedIn. I'm the one with the goofy little trademark emoji by my name. So always happy to help people, always happy to just have a conversation and just put some good karma out there. So hit me up anytime.
I love it. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that me and Emmett, our founder, can come and join you in Costa Rica for some surfing in November.
It's in November, everybody. Yeah, so you might as well come. So and enjoy yourself. It's the best time of the year to be there.
Nowhere better to be. Yeah, Richard, thank you for joining us. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you all for the next one.